Imagine living in a place where the sun never touches your face, where every sound echoes because there's no one around to hear it, and where days feel like weeks and weeks feel like years. Now imagine this isn't a cave, or a bunker, or a deserted island. It's a prison block, built not to punish the body, but to test the limits of the human mind. This is EBlock, the most isolated prison block on Earth. Few people have ever seen inside it. Even fewer have lived there long enough to talk about it. And today, we are taking you inside. Welcome to Northwind Correctional Facility, deep in the northern mountains, a place so remote that half the year, the only way in or out is by helicopter. But that's not what makes Northwind famous. What makes it infamous is EBlock, a place designed for absolute isolation, where inmates spend more time with their thoughts than with any human voice, and where the strongest personalities in the world have cracked under silence alone. But behind all this mystery lies a story the world was never meant to hear, a story about the people locked inside, the officers assigned to watch over them, and the strange psychological effects this place has on anyone who steps through its steel doors. This is the true story of the world's most isolated prison block. Before we step inside EBlock, we need to understand where it came from and why it was built in the first place. Northwind Correctional Facility wasn't originally designed to be extreme. When construction began in the late 1980s, it was supposed to be a normal high-security prison, built to house inmates from across the northern region. But during construction, the state ran into two massive problems: overcrowded prisons across the region. A group of high-profile inmates who needed extra monitoring, not because they were violent, but because they were escape risks, whistleblowers, or required protective separation. These weren't dangerous criminals. Many were people who simply couldn't be safely placed in general population. Former law enforcement officers, individuals receiving threats, high-profile financial convicts. People whose cases gained unwanted media attention. The solution? A specialized wing. One that ensured absolute safety through absolute isolation. And so, what began as a practical idea soon turned into an experiment. Could isolation protect people better than any guard ever could? The answer wasn't as simple as the blueprint suggested. Before it was called EBlock, staff simply referred to it as the lower tier. A long hallway carved into the basement level of Northwind. No windows. Thick concrete walls. A design meant to reduce noise down to almost nothing. The layout was simple. A single corridor, 14 cells, one control room and 2 access points. The officer gate, the medical hallway. What made the lower tier unique wasn't the construction. It was the rules. Inmates here weren't cut off as punishment. They were separated for protection. That meant no contact with other inmates, limited movement, strict schedules, frequent check-ins, controlled interactions with staff. Every detail, from the lighting to the airflow, was engineered to keep the environment stable, predictable, and calm. But even with all those precautions, something unexpected happened. During the first year, the lower tier operated quietly. Staff rotated, inmates adjusted, and for a while, everything seemed normal. But soon, officers noticed something strange. Every inmate, no matter their background, personality, or sentence, began showing similar behaviors after just a few months. They became more reflective, more quiet, more cautious with their words, and strangely, more honest. One officer described it like this: officer log comment, voiceover, "It's like the block turns people inward. They start thinking about their life in a different way. Some become calmer. Some become anxious. But everyone becomes quieter." Psychologists were brought in to observe. They concluded that the isolation wasn't harming the inmates, but it wasn't neutral either. The lower tier was changing people. Not physically, not violently, but mentally, through silence, routine, and introspection. It was then the state made a controversial decision. They approved funding to turn the lower tier into a full-scale experimental wing. They renamed it EBlock. E for experimental, E for evaluation, and unofficially, E for empty. Because in EBlock, emptiness was the environment. Now that you understand how EBlock was created, let's step inside and meet the people whose stories shaped its reputation. But here's the surprising part. The inmates of EBlock were not who you'd expect to find in a place like this. There were no high-risk violent offenders, no notorious criminals, no danger to society. Instead, EBlock held a retired police officer who received threats after testifying, an accountant involved in a major corporate scandal, a political whistleblower, a former government contractor who leaked internal documents, a businessman caught in a financial investigation who needed protective custody, and a handful of people awaiting decisions that placed them in legal limbo. These individuals weren't isolated because of what they did. They were isolated because of what others might do to them. Many of them willingly agreed to stay in EBlock for their own safety. But even then, the environment slowly reshaped their lives. One former inmate described it years later. Former inmate, voiceover, it wasn't the guards. It wasn't the rules. It wasn't boredom. It was the quiet. You start hearing things you've ignored your whole life. Your thoughts, your regrets, your hopes. Some days it felt peaceful, some days overwhelming. EBlock was not a punishment. But it wasn't easy either. You might assume inmates had it the hardest. But interviews revealed something surprising. Many officers struggled with EBlock as well. Why? Because EBlock created an environment unlike any other part of the prison. It was quiet, slow, emotionally heavy, and mentally draining. Officers spent hours walking the same hallway, listening to the same hum of air vents, checking on people who barely spoke. Some describe it as a shift inside your own head, a place where time moves differently. A building that makes you think about your life more than your job. This wasn't a dangerous assignment. It was a psychological one. And not everyone could handle it. Everything in EBlock followed routine. Same schedule. Same lights. Same temperature. Same footsteps on the concrete. Until one morning, something happened that exposed the deepest flaw in the design of the most isolated block in the world. A flaw not physical, but human. It began with a sound. Not a loud noise. Not a shout. Just a small, unusual sound echoing down the hallway. It was the first hint that isolation, no matter how controlled, can never fully contain the human experience. And what happened next would become the most talked about moment in the entire history of EBlock. 4 years, EBlock was predictable. Every morning, officers walked the same hallway, checked the same doors, and heard the same mechanical hum from the air vents. So when Officer Marin heard something different, even she couldn't place it at first. It was faint, soft, rhythmic, almost like tapping. She paused in the middle of the corridor and listened. Nothing. Just the usual silence. Then, there it was again. Not chaotic or alarming. Just unusual. And in a place where nothing unusual ever happened, even tiny changes carried weight. Officer Marin began walking slowly, following the faint sound. Her footsteps echoed gently, bouncing off the smooth concrete. Officer Marin, voiceover EBlock doesn't allow surprises. When something breaks the routine, your brain notices instantly. The tapping didn't sound like distress. It didn't sound like communication either. It sounded like someone creating a pattern, a rhythm, almost like music. When she reached cell 5, the one furthest from the officer station, the tapping stopped. She waited. Nothing. Silence again. Thick and unbroken. She made her notes, logged the moment, and went on with her shift. She didn't know it then, but that small sound was the beginning of the most intriguing story ever recorded in EBlock. The occupant of Cell 5 was a man named Daniel Rourke. Daniel wasn't famous. He wasn't dangerous. He wasn't loud or unpredictable. He was quiet, thoughtful, a former engineer with a reputation for being meticulous, polite, and respectful. He had ended up in EBlock for a reason very few people ever knew. He was awaiting sentencing in a huge corporate case where many individuals feared he might reveal confidential internal information. For his protection, he was placed in EBlock. Daniel was the kind of person who paid attention to details. The way light reflected off the wall, the airflow pattern from a vent, the faint vibrations in the floor, the echoes in the corridor, and, unknown to officers, he had been listening to the rhythm of the block for months. The tapping sound? It wasn't an SOS. It wasn't communication. Daniel was trying something unusual. He was trying to recreate the soundscape of the outside world using nothing but the patterns of EBlock itself. Later, he explained. Daniel, interview voiceover, I missed the sound of rain. The sound of footsteps in a city. The sound of life. In EBlock, the silence is so complete you start inventing ways to fill it. His tapping wasn't boredom. It was an attempt to stay connected to a world he could no longer see. But what started as a personal habit soon affected the entire block. The next morning, Officer Marin heard the tapping again. This time, she paid closer attention. And that's when she noticed something strange. It wasn't random. It had a structure, a rhythm, almost like a beat. It was soft enough not to disturb anyone, but present enough that officers started recognizing it during rounds. And slowly, without Daniel realizing, EBlock began changing. Officers found themselves listening for the sound. They found it comforting in a strange way. One officer later said, "Officer Lee, voiceover, it gave the block a heartbeat. A place like that, you forget time exists. But that pattern, that rhythm, it reminded us that someone was living, thinking, feeling." Even inmates in separate cells, though isolated, felt the change. Not through conversation, not through direct interaction, but through awareness, through the shared experience of hearing something human in a place designed to strip all sensation down to the minimum. Prison psychologists had warned for years about the effects of extreme silence. Silence this deep doesn't calm the mind, it intensifies it. People begin noticing small details, thinking more deeply, reflecting on life choices, feeling time stretch, becoming hyper-aware of themselves. Daniel's tapping introduced something new, a consistent, gentle pattern. Something to anchor to. Something rhythmic. Something that felt alive. Psychologists later studied what happened during those weeks and came to a fascinating conclusion. Humans naturally seek patterns, especially in isolation. A single consistent sound can stabilize an entire environment. And that's exactly what happened in EBlock. The tension dropped. Officers felt less stressed. Inmates seemed calmer. Everything became more grounded. A sound that wasn't meant to communicate ended up connecting everyone. In a block designed to separate people from the world, Daniel Rourke accidentally created the one thing EBlock never had, a sense of community. One afternoon, Dr. Hales, the psychologist overseeing EBlock, decided to speak with Daniel. Not for disciplinary reasons. Not because there was a complaint, but because she wanted to understand why he was doing this. Daniel sat calmly during the meeting, hands folded. "Dr. Hales, Daniel, officers have noticed you tapping. Is everything okay?" Daniel nodded. "Daniel, I'm not trying to bother anyone. I needed something steady. Something that reminded me of life before all this." Dr. Hales asked him to explain. His answer became one of the most quoted lines in the entire EBlock history. "Daniel, calmly, silence is good. But too much silence makes you forget who you are." Dr. Hales later wrote in her report excerpt, "Rourke demonstrates high emotional intelligence. His behavior indicates a sophisticated attempt to self-regulate within an environment of sensory minimalism." In simpler terms, he wasn't trying to break rules. He was trying to keep his mind healthy. This led to an unexpected shift. After observing Daniel's effect on the environment, the administration decided to test something new, something never done in EBlock before. They installed a soft ambient sound system hidden within the vents. Not music, not voices, just low white noise, gentle airflow hums, faint machine-like rhythms, and subtle sound textures meant to mimic natural environments. The goal? To reduce psychological strain on both inmates and staff without breaking the block's security purpose. When the system activated for the first time, inmates described the experience like this. Former inmate A, voiceover, it was like the block suddenly breathed. Former inmate B, for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt balanced. Daniel smiled the first time he heard it. He knew immediately where the idea came from. Not from his tapping, but from what the tapping revealed about human need. Isolation may protect people physically, but psychologically, humans need texture. Something to tether the mind. And now, EBlock had it. This story isn't about breaking rules. No one spoke, no messages were exchanged. But what happened next shows how deeply people can be connected without a single word. Across from Daniel's cell lived Mr. Hargrove, a quiet, older man who felt invisible. After the prison installed a sound system, Daniel's tapping stopped. But then, a new sound emerged. A soft, slow tapping, almost like an answer, coming from Hargrove's cell. It wasn't communication. It was a reflection. A simple, human gesture. Daniel later said, "I never spoke to the man. I never saw him. But for a few seconds a day, I didn't feel alone." Even the officers understood. This wasn't a security threat. It was a lifeline. It turns out, this is a universal human response to isolation, creating rhythm to stabilize the mind. This small act changed EBlock forever. Tension dropped, incidents fell, and a place designed to isolate people became a place of self-discovery. EBlock may be the most isolated prison block in the world, but it's also a testament to the resilience of the human mind. In the silence, people found themselves. In the emptiness, they discovered connection. And in a place built to separate, They created subtle ways to remind each other that they were still human. Isolation may change a person, but sometimes it reveals the strongest parts of who we are. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There are countless untold stories from the world's most secretive prisons, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for watching, and remember, even in the quietest corners of the world, human ingenuity, hope, and resilience always find a way. Subscribe for more real-life crime and prison documentaries. Follow us for the untold stories that shock, inspire, and reveal the human experience.